It's a pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of Buddhists across traditions. This is the second year that we're coming together to steer our energy towards honoring and acknowledging the UN declared International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is actually tomorrow on the 21st of March. This day is observed annually on the day that police in Sharpeville, South Africa, opened fire and killed 69 people at a peaceful demonstration against apartheid pass laws in 1960. So, since the UN declaration in 1979, the legislated apartheid system in South Africa has been dismantled, but we can see that racial and ethnic violence continues. The theme for this year's Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is Voices for Action Against Racism. So, before we start, I'd just like to invite everybody to take a few seconds to connect to our breath and our breathing, and in any way that you feel comfortable taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So let's just take a few seconds in silence to center ourselves, bring ourselves fully present to the space, get in touch with our breathing, and recall the three jewels. Thank you. Thank you, Rahina. If you would invite the bell. Thank you. So today we welcome our ancestors, both biological and spiritual ancestors, whose collective energy has brought us here today and which is present with us here today. And we honor the earth who holds us in non-discrimination. And as we enter this space, I want to acknowledge and invite us all to hold in our hearts and our minds the suffering experienced by people in conflict zones and who have been displaced because of conflicts around the world, and who are seeking refuge at this time, including Afghanistan, Burkina Faso, Algeria, Cameroon, Chad, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Iraq, Libya, Mali, Mozambique, Niger, Nigeria, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Tunisia, Colombia, Myanmar, Syria, Palestine, Ukraine. There are about 6.8 million refugees because of the Syrian conflict, about 4.1 million from Venezuela, 2.6 from Afghanistan, 2.2 million from South Sudan, 1.1 million from Myanmar, 2 million from Ukraine, and over 35 million of these refugees are displaced children. So, we've gathered here today. There's, I don't know, about what have we got? About 40, 50 people online with us. So that's a lot of collective energy, which we can steer in a positive direction towards these people and really hold them in our thoughts and yeah, hold them in our thoughts and give them as much of our positive prayers as much as we can. So as part of this then, we are holding a session today where we're going to explore whether white awake Sanghas offer a path to racial healing and justice across the intersectionality of race, class and gender. We welcome Dr Ava Avalos, Dr Rhonda Williams, Dr Gleig and Dr Carolyn Starkey. But before we get going, there's a few things I just wanted to mention. So these reflections can often bring up conversations and dialogues, opinions, thoughts, and reflections, which may activate certain feelings in us. And I invite you to hold these feelings with openness and kindness, and really be present for the humanity of everybody who's speaking today and everybody who has the bravery to express their thoughts and opinions. We've shared in an email our intentions in hosting this event and holding this space, but as a reminder, this will be shared in the link in the chat, shared as a link in the chat. But just to recap a few of the points, we try to make our spaces as welcoming, caring, and as comfortable as possible. And we try to create opportunities for growth and to unlearn our conditioned behavior and biases. But it's impossible to do it perfectly, and we acknowledge that mistakes can and very likely will be made, and that until the process of unlearning is completed, no space can be 100% safe. I heard a term recently, I don't know if anybody's come across this, but I heard the term brave space recently, and I really like that. Real safety does not guarantee that there will not be discomfort, but it guarantees or it enables a space where we can have difficult conversations and strengthen our relationships to each other and to the compassion and to develop compassion for mistakes that people make as we all awaken from our ignorance. So please do whatever you need to do to look after yourselves today. If you need to take a break, take a break. If you need to have a glass of water, reconnect with your breathing, do whatever you need to do to keep yourself grounded and feeling well during this time together. So as I said, we all have our kind of social, historical, and cultural conditionings. And sometimes this can come out in our speech and language. I was giving a talk recently where somebody asked, I don't want to offend anybody, so what are the right things to say? And I said, well, language is very complex and it changes, and even within one group, you might have differing opinions about what is and what isn't acceptable. So, as long as our intentions and our motivations and our compassion is there, then we can stumble and we can make mistakes, but we can also be open to correcting those mistakes and receiving feedback. And if you identify anything that you feel uncomfortable with and you think that we can work on as a collective, then please get in touch with us and share that feedback with us. So just to give a little bit of an idea of the running order for today, we'll start the evening with a grounding by Ava, after which we'll have a short orientation by Rhonda before we move into discussion. We'll have a short musical interlude then, and then if time allows, we'll open up for a question and answer session, and then we'll close with dedication and some music. So a little prompt on the Zoom technical points. First, you will have noticed that we are recording the event, so please use the Zoom functions to preserve your anonymity if you'd like, so you can change your name or you can turn your camera off. And during the question answer period, we'll do what we can on our side to preserve anonymity in the recording. And feel free to update your name and share which part of the earth you're in today, so that we can connect with you, even though we're joining from all different parts of the world. And feel free to introduce yourself to everybody in the chat if you'd like to. Everybody will be muted. And we'll close the chat once we start the meditation, just to prevent disruption. But you'll still be able to chat with the technical hosts if you have any issues, and you'll be able to identify them because they have tech or Zoom in front of their name. So you'll see tech host Kev is there. So hopefully you guys can identify him. So yeah, if you feel that you want to raise a question throughout the session for any of the panelists, then please send it through to me. So you can find my name in the chat. It's Kamlo. We do, as a BIPOC-centered collective, we prioritize BIPOC voices. So if you are BIPOC and you have a question, just indicate yourself with a little star or asterisk before your question, and we'll make sure to bring those to the front of the queue. So yeah, tech captioning is on. So if you need any help in setting that up, setting up captioning, please reach out to one of the tech hosts. And to again to prevent any disruption and allow the energy of the dialogue to flow. Please don't send any chats to the panelists while the dialogue is going on, just so that they can remain focused and engaged in the conversation. And finally, if there are any technical disruptions, we have a system in place to resolve this. We've got people in the room today who will be able to identify that for us and let us know. So there's no need to send messages or anything like that. We'll be able to identify it and resolve it as soon as we can. So that's it for all the housekeeping and spiel from me. Thank you for your patience and bearing with me. I'll now hand over to Ava. So Rahina, if you could invite the bell, and Ava will open our session with a grounding exercise. Thank you so much, Ava.
Thank you, Kamlo. Thank you, Rahina. Greetings from Botswana, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you, and happy equinox. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to participate, and I'm really looking forward to the dialogue. Before we get to that, I'm going to be doing a grounding exercise. And right now, we're taking grounding to mean focusing our awareness and concentration within our bodies, and simply allowing ourselves to experience our physicality and its position on Earth right now. So to touch and root down in ourselves and to the planet. So I'm going to lead you through just some gentle focusing inward. So please be mindful of your vulnerabilities and try not to be triggered in any way. The intention here is to feel safe, supported, and relaxed. So let's start by making sure that you have a comfortable seat or a place in your room, and that can even be lying on the ground if you feel to. The idea is to feel supported without any kind of strain. So I'll give you a minute to find that space. And we'll start with our eyes closed and noticing our breath. As we sit together, we acknowledge that to be open-minded requires us to begin to cultivate a sense of open-bodiedness, to feel a safety, to relax into ourselves. So beginning with the breath, allowing yourself to feel your lungs expand and contract in your chest. Perhaps feeling the rhythm of your heart already somewhere in your bodies. Breathing and beating. Breathing in and breathing out. Allow yourself to relax your face, your jaw, and your shoulders. If you're seated on the ground or on a chair, you can just let your head fall gently forward. Allow your head to move right and left. Just let it feel good back and forth. Letting go without imposing any pain on yourself. Just letting it feel gentle and easy, just relaxing. Release your neck. If you're lying down, you can move your head right and left. Just letting our big heads go. Breathing. Relaxing. Coming back to center and allowing yourself to enter the world of senses, the world of sensation. Noticing whether your body is hot or cold, your breath is shallow or deep. Check in with what's happening in your thoughts. Dissolve self-judgment and your stories. Keep coming back to allowing yourself just to experience your body, whatever is happening, wherever there's tenderness, giving yourself a chance to just breathe there. Acknowledge it. Coming back to your center and get a sense of that energy that comes from the very bottom of your pelvis through your vertebral bodies, right through your neck and the top and crown of your head. Acknowledge your brain is like an octopus. It's not an octopus. Your brain is like a jellyfish, but both swim. You have these tentacles that come down from your brain all the way through your spinal column, beautifully designed bones. You can imagine them like butterflies fluttering. So it's chemicals and light and energy that's coming from the very base of your spine and circulating up and out. So get a sense of that up for a breath, feeling extended. And also a breath down into the earth. And our nervous system extends again from the very top of our brain to our fingertips and our toes, the very ends of our toes. So get a sense again of the circuitry, magical circuitry that connects all of the senses, all of our experiences of the here and now. Breathing, and as you're seated, just allow yourself to just gently twist to the right. You can take your left hand on your right knee or just support yourself in any way with your arms to gently turn. And again, feeling the length of your spine, the softness, the beauty of that, the grace of mobility in your body. Breathing, turning, and relaxing. And releasing back to center, breathing. And going to the left, same thing. Easy and gentle. Opening. And relaxing back to center. Let it feel good as you breathe. Again, you can wiggle. You can move. If you're lying on the ground, you can bend your knees and let your knees fall to the right or left. Again, right now, we're just getting a sense of the spine, the nervous system, and connecting downward into the ground. Letting your body move a little bit more forward now, curling your spine down. And again, you can support yourself either on the ground, your legs, if you're sitting at a table, your arms, they're just curling your spine, creating space. And then slowly unwinding and just doing that a few times so you get a sense of how much space there is inside of you and how much potential there is to create more space. Anything that's tender, you can massage or move around. Just honoring whatever's happening for you. Coming back to center and getting a sense of yourself between the earth and sky. Bringing your hands behind you in whatever way feels good and going ahead and lifting your chest and just looking up. Let your neck fall back, maybe right back into your shoulders and get a sense of the universe above us right now. Billions and billions of stars, billions and billions of possibilities above us and around us. And releasing back to center. Feeling your breath inside and out. Listening deeply. Connecting your feet in any way to the ground and just pushing into your feet. If you're sitting, pushing into your heels, into your toes, and connecting. Allowing yourself to connect fully with the earth, with the sense of Mother Earth. And like a tree, growing roots down and at the same time lifting up between earth and sky. And allow yourself to take a nice stretch up, wiggling your fingers and toes, bringing your palms together at your heart center, perhaps crossing your hands across your chest, and allowing yourself to make an aspiration for our time together. What's your heart's desire to be here? Dedicate your time to someone you love. And feel for a minute all of this love you can generate and just release that out across the planet, across each other here. Allowing yourself to experience the magic of the generation of love and openness and tolerance and joy. Beautiful. And Rahina will give us a bell. Deepest gratitude.
Thank you so much, Ava. That was wonderful. And now I'll hand over to Rhonda, who will be facilitating a conversation and introducing the panelists. Rhonda, thank you so much.
Hello. I had to get to that unmute button. Greetings, everyone. My name's Rhonda, and we're going to have a wonderful discussion this afternoon here in Nashville, Tennessee, US side. I know it's evening for some and morning for others. I want to thank Ava for that beautiful grounding practice. Sometimes right before I'm on tap to do something, I go through my stuff, and move around and get things together. And this time I just really settled in to the beautiful practice that you offered us. So thank you so much for that grounding. Everyone, we're going to have a conversation with Anne and Caroline. And I want to just say a couple things to kind of get us started before we jump right in. One is you might have already gotten a sense of my energy. So it's a little bubbly, sometimes a little excited, but I'll try to keep it even and hopefully bring a little lightness and humor into what will be a very deep, investigative, at times weighty, maybe tension-filled kind of conversation. But it's in that discomfort sometimes that these things open up. We need this discomfort. And Dr. King called it creative tension. So that's what we're going to try to generate here. Also, I want you to know that we're going to try to have a conversational style. So there may be times when Anne and Caroline are speaking that I jump in to the conversation. I want you to know it's not being rude. I'm not cutting them off, but I am trying to keep things flowing, and something may pique my interest. The other thing is I'm going to invite in at times our BIPOC BAM Global Majority Voices in the form of Ava and Rahina, where I think maybe we could get a little expansion and a little bit more dialogue going as well around this issue of white awareness. So just a little context. We are locating the questions that we're going to be discussing in the context of the Western convert Sangha. And these Western convert Sanghas are often predominantly white, and so they perpetuate kind of white-centeredness, right? White supremacy, in a sense, whether intentional or unintentional. And I do want to say intentional or unintentional, because it manifests in both ways in our Sangha spaces. And that's something that we are going to have conversations about, and that's something we're trying to work on in this phrase called white awareness. Many of these spaces are now trying to be inclusive through these white awareness activities and activities that we will call inclusion activities. So we're going to dive a little bit underneath of that as well. The rise of the white affinity Sangha and group aims to address often the dismantling of white supremacy culture that exists within themselves, and themselves meaning the people in the Sangha, themselves meaning the Sangha themselves meaning the traditions, and how they're translated into those Sangha spaces. And also trying to act and figure out ways to engage in solidarity politics and solidarity actions with BIPOC, BAM, and global majority peoples to create more inclusive spaces and allyship. So that's the context in which we're operating. And so I do want to just jump into some dialogue with Anne and Caroline. You have their bios on the Buddhist Across Traditions website. I'm not going to spend a lot of our time on their bios. I'm going to give them an opportunity to tell us a little bit about themselves, and you can read more in depth about the two doctors here with us. So our first question then, and Anne, if you'll start, and Caroline, if you'll go next. And Caroline, tell me if it's Caroline or Carolyn. I'm saying Caroline, but you make sure I'm calling you by the right pronunciation. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what called you to be a part of this event we're having here right now.
Yeah, sure. I just, first of all, just want to say thank you for the hosts. Thank you for the beautiful grounding meditation, Ava. Thank you for the generous intro and orientation, Rhonda. So about me, so I'm from Liverpool. On a more personal note, I'm from Liverpool, but I live in Florida, teach in Florida now. And I actually grew up Catholic, but started practicing Buddhism as a teenager, and then went to Bristol University to study Buddhism when I was 18 in 1990. So that kind of started my, personal and scholarly journey in Buddhism. And I guess more recently, over the last maybe decade, I've been focusing on social justice, racial justice, LGBTQI issues in Buddhism in a North American context. And I was really excited to be part of the event. I see it as, an opportunity to connect with other like-minded Buddhists, make community, and also I'm friends with Caroline, so it's really nice to be doing something together. It's great to meet Rhonda and all the others on the event, and then also just a service to share some of my research on white awareness groups. So it's lovely to be here, and I really appreciate everyone showing up.
Caroline. If Anne is calling you Caroline, it's Caroline. Because she's your friend.
Oh, sorry,
Caroline. Caroline's you're right. Thank you. And just to echo what Anne said about the wonderful welcome and start from Kamlo's brilliant introduction, Ava's grounding, Rhonda's warm energy. It's just really lovely to be with you here on a Sunday evening for me. And just to apologise in advance, I'm home with my children who are under some instruction not to shout for me to intervene in an inevitable argument between them. However, they don't always follow instruction. So I do apologise if you might hear them shouting. You might well hear them shouting. So a bit about me. So I work at the University of Leeds, which is in, I see quite a lot of American attenders here, but for those who don't know, that's in the north part of England. I've been involved with Buddhism since I was born. I wasn't born in the UK, but I moved to the UK when I was 17. So Buddhism has been the kind of, so Anne said she was brought up a Catholic. Buddhism was kind of just the religion that surrounded me because of my family. But as I said, I moved to the UK when I was 17, and I began to explore sort of various Buddhist groups here. So in the main, that's mostly been Theravada Buddhist groups, but more recently I've been spending time in a Tibetan Buddhist group near my home. So it's really just about 10 minutes away from me at home. So Rahina and I had been having conversations for a little while about working together. And at an event that I put on, an academic event, I shared with her some work I was doing about class conflict in relation to a particular Buddhist centre near me, as well as a bit of work I'd done on gender. And she thought that it would make an interesting conversation event. Like Anne, I work often and I'm part of a convert, what you call a convert focus group. But I've also been involved with what problematically is called heritage Buddhist groups. And I've done work on female ordination, and more particularly what I'm interested in, and hopefully I'll be able to weave this into the conversation, is stuff around space and aesthetics. And I guess what I'm mostly interested in and what I mostly think about is kind of what makes our Buddhist culture in Britain, and how the local intersects with the transnational, and how class, gender, race, age, generation, etc. all work together to form kind of particular spaces. So I'm super excited to be here today. Anne is far more of an expert than I am. And I'm really looking forward to learning a great deal from her and her work, and from you and all your kind of ideas. And I'm super interested to listen and see the direction of conversation and to learn.
Thank you both, Anne and Caroline. So, expertise comes in different packages, right? It comes in, these things we call doctorates, and it comes in everyday experiences. And for this session on white awareness, right? How do we think about white awareness and transforming white supremacy and the ways in which injustices manifest themselves? It comes in the package of whiteness. So you're both expert on some level in that, right? I can say that, right? Because you're both white, right? So let's talk about that, right? I mean, sometimes that can make people cringe, right? But this is why we're here. We're here to talk about white awareness, and you both bring expertise in those ways. So as white folks, and your different kinds of whiteness, right? Whiteness in class, whiteness in gender, whiteness in sexuality. How do you speak of and practice allyship and solidarity? You can talk about this intraracially and interracially, right? Because that's kind of why we're here, also talking about the global majority, BIPOC, BAM. But there's also these identities within whiteness, and we're not all homogenous, no matter if we're talking about whiteness or BIPOC, BAM, or global majority. So talk a little bit about questions around allyship and solidarity within the Buddhist tradition.
Great. Caroline, do you want me to go first?
Yeah,
okay. So I guess, probably the main way that I practice allyship is I'm kind of going to talk both kind of more personally and also with my academic hat. They're kind of blended, but they're also distinct. So in terms of my academic work, I think, I've done a couple of things. One is that I've kind of traced historically the kind of emergence of POC, people of color, kind of affinity groups, and the wider movement for racial justice, mostly within my own research speciality, which are, what have been historically white majority convert groups. And as Caroline had mentioned, the labels convert and heritage, and there's a lot of problems with them, and they themselves have been used to perpetuate racism and racial hierarchy. So, wanting to hold them loosely and kind of, not reiterate those problems. But essentially, I kind of, did some ethnographic studies for those non-academics. Ethnography is a kind of academic method where you interview people and kind of work on the ground with, different types of religious populations, and then kind of present their work in a more academic framing. So I did some, early work on racial justice in the Insight communities and Tibetan communities. There's a lot more work on racial justice by scholars, colleagues of mine. I'd be happy to share some resources, some really excellent work coming out of from Asian American scholars. Just want to give a shout out to Funi Su, Duncan Williams, Chenzing Han. But so that was, I guess the first thing that I did. And then I really noticed that there was a tremendous backlash to even talking about racial justice as a Buddhist practice. And so more recently, I've been focusing on my scholarship on trying to understand that white backlash to racial justice work. And so I've done that as scholarship, but I've also, presented it in more public forums. So I've done, articles for Lions Roar, Tricycle, some blogs. And I've also gone into Buddhist communities, worked at Spirit Rock. Larry Yang, Gina Sharp invited me in to do some work with the teacher trainees, and other Zen communities, and just, try to share what I've learned, through my scholarship as a way to kind of raise awareness. Mm-hmm. And also really, I think that, scholars have a certain amount of authority, Rhonda, as you pointed to. We're considered experts, and so scholars can actually grant legitimacy to Buddhist practice, to racial justice as Buddhist practice. We can, be part of the broad movement towards racial justice, and not only can we, but we should. And some of that is also taking responsibility for our own complicity in whiteness. And Buddhist studies as a field was very much in many ways in Europe and North America, had a strong strand of white supremacy. So my colleague and friend Joseph Shea has written about the complicity of Buddhist studies in white supremacy. So I think as a white scholar, and really only learning this through relationships with colleagues of color, especially, I realized, wow, I'm a white person, and I've been complicit in this like white supremacy through my own scholarship, unintentionally, but nonetheless. So really, I've been really trying to take responsibility for that complicity, individual and a field, and kind of offer something, healing, and I guess in Buddhist language, an antidote to some of the white supremacist harm that's being done. And then just on a more personal level, I think as a practitioner, I just, for me, allyship's about relationship. So, just standing with my Buddhist friends of color in whatever ways are, appropriate and needed at the time. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Carolyn, I want to bring you in here, and I want to pick up on a thread. Maybe you can weave into your response on white backlash. The idea that there were white people who responded, why are we talking about race and racial justice within Buddhist circles, within our practice? It's all about, us being universal and we're all human beings, and that can take us towards this idea of spiritual bypass, and people do that without sometimes knowing, and they do it sometimes knowing. So Caroline, let me bring your voice in here, and if you can weave that in, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll start with that, Rhonda, if that's okay, because I think, because I've certainly really, really strongly noticed that, and that's, the idea that we shouldn't be. I said, I can remember this when I came back to England for the first time, and was spending time in a particular Buddhist group, and I've always been concerned about gender, so I've always been really interested in issues in relation to gender. And I remember trying to raise it with the Buddhist group that I'd started practicing with, and someone, and it happened to be a white man, but I don't know how relevant that is. I think it's probably quite relevant. He said to me, "You're too concerned with gender. You're not a very good Buddhist. You're too concerned with gender, and what you need to do is you need to leave it." The other thing he also said to me, because I've been brought up in Thailand and around about Thailand, and I had a real issue with pointing my feet, or people pointing their feet at the Buddha, towards the Buddha. And he said, well, what you need to do is you need to keep practicing by pointing your feet at the Buddha, just so that you let go of this kind of like clearly negative kind of cultural conditioning that he clearly seemed to think that I have, with an obsession with, in his terms, an obsession with gender, an obsession with a particular ritual practice that is still highly important to me for many, many reasons. And I didn't stay long practicing in that group, to be honest, because I don't really want to be. And I guess this is part of the idea of allyship that Anne was talking about in a relational way, is I actually genuinely don't want to be part of a group that says something like that, and that kind of squashes our discussion and our engagement. It's just that, well, you're wrong, and you're too obsessed with gender. I thought, well, no. But I'm having the same kinds of things when you begin to talk about race and when you begin to talk about class. It's exactly the same conversation. And this is like 10 years later or 15 years later, and it's exactly the same conversation. And we had this when we were advertising this workshop as well. Why would you're not being a very good Buddhist. You're not, this isn't Buddhism to be discussing race or gender or class or any of those things. You should let them go. And it's almost as if it's like, who owns Buddhism? It's this assumed neutral perspective, and it's not neutral at all. It's entirely white, it's entirely middle class, it's highly educated, it's all of these things. It's like this assumption of neutrality. How I practice allyship, well, quite often, I like I've said, I practice with my feet, and that is that I don't want to be in those spaces that do that. I'd rather be in spaces that allow those kinds of conversations, and I refuse to say part of those kinds of spaces, and would rather make new spaces. And the same goes for Buddhist studies. You know, I started my PhD being quite closely connected to Buddhist studies in the UK, and I really struggle because whenever you raise something about race in particular, but gender or any of those things, or gender less so actually, but race certainly, it was kind of seen to be not academic enough. That wasn't academic enough. And for this, I have a problem. I align myself academically much more with the discipline of sociology, and I find that that's more spacious to be able to have these kinds of conversations. For me personally, I'm not a particularly confrontational person. In fact, I'm kind of not a confrontational person at all. I'm naturally very introverted. And so one of the ways I like to think, and I think I don't think I'm not the person to judge whether or not I've been a good ally. I think that's for other people to judge. But for me, what I think is important is being able to kind of sit with discomforting things and continuing to raise the issues that I think that matter. And as Rhonda was talking about, this kind of discomforting state.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I like to try to allow in my own personal practice, but also sit with the discomfort in my academic stuff, which is far from perfect. And just see what arises.
Yeah, let me jump in here a bit. We've already gotten some questions that are starting to come in, and I think they're relevant for where we are in the conversation. And then, so what I want to do is I want to actually put these two questions into the mix, but I don't want you to answer them yet. I want to put them in the mix, and then I would like a sound of the bell for us to breathe before we begin to continue our conversation. So I'm going to ask Rahina to give us a sound of the bell after I read these two questions. And I think you will hear some of the echoes in terms of the conversation that we've opened up, and why, as a practitioner myself, in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village tradition, just to say that in the order of interbeing, why it's so important as a BIPOC, BAM, global majority person to have these conversations and to have them within our Sanghas and to have them the way we're having them right now. And to understand, I just would like to say the Z that my teacher talks about, which is there's the historical dimension and there's the ultimate dimension. And you can't get to the ultimate until you go through the historical and connect the two, because we all have earth clothes that we move in, and we all have perceptions and delusions and things that we are practicing with. And so this is a part of our practice. So let me ask these two questions. The two questions are this. This conversation meeting appears to be loaded with highly questionable concepts that have nothing whatever to do with Buddhist practice, and which are widely viewed by many people as harmful nonsense. Is this something to be encouraged amongst those engaging with Buddhism? That's the first question. And the second question is, racism or statement, racism has kept me up nights for 55 years. And I know it's present in me and in my all-white Sangha. I could use some help. Thanks. So Rahina, if you could offer us a sound of the bell and let us breathe, and then we can move on to whatever's next in the agenda. I'll let Kamlo tell me if we're gonna continue with our questions and conversation. We can start with these and then move into what is white awareness work, because I think this translates very nicely, or if we're up for a short break. This is Rhonda bowing out.
Thanks, Rhonda.
This is Rhonda bowing back in. So Kamlo, I'm keeping it flowing, right? So we have these two questions.
Let's keep it flowing.
Let's keep it flowing. Here we are.
Hmm.
The conversation and the questions emerging nicely here. And here is the experience in the moment of experiencing what, as a BIPOC BAM global majority person experiences in Sanghas, and staying with it and saying, okay, let me embrace and smile at this, and let's have some conversation about this. This is why it's important. And here you are, two white folks. My fellow practitioners, beloved Anne and Caroline, because you have names, right? A little joviality and humor here to the degree that we can have that. So how are these questions sitting with you all, and how does this actually relate to what is white awareness work? Either one of you jump in, feel free. And maybe you start, or Caroline, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I don't want to jump on.
No, you jump right in. Go ahead, please.
It's so familiar. It's so familiar to me. The first statement is so familiar. I've heard it so many times. And I've not even heard that statement, but that statement's been hanging there. You know, what are you doing? This is not real Buddhism. It's like it's everywhere. It's pregnant with it. Sometimes when I walk into the center I'm going to all the time, it's just sort of, it's so heavy there all the time. Like you're just asking the wrong question, and really we should be focusing on doing something else. And I find it really distressing. Because what allowing that question to be, you know, the question, it's all just nonsense. Giving that space, giving that airtime, it means that the communities that we are connected to, or the communities that I know, be really honest, the communities that I've been connected to, and the same as the second question, the communities are not welcoming spaces. They're not, and they pretend to be. They sometimes pretend to be, but they're not really, or not all of them are. You know, and one of the things, and I don't know if it's the right time to talk about this now, maybe I'll leave it in there. But one of the things I'm really interested in is the kind of space and aesthetic. And I think, and I don't know if this is the same in the US, because I've never been to a Buddhist center in the US, so I can't say, but I've been to lots and lots of Buddhist centers in the United Kingdom. And particularly the convert focus, I know we have problems with their terms, but it's a term for pragmatism and ease, right? The convert focus groups, many of them look really similar in the UK, okay? So they might have what, I don't know if you have this kind of paint in the US that's called Farrow and Ball, okay? It's a really fancy paint that you put on the walls, and it has a particular aesthetic, okay? It costs 20 times the amount of normal paint, 30 times the amount of normal paint, and it has a particular aesthetic. The aesthetic is a polished wooden floor, a very pale wall, a Buddha that might look quite white, you know, a particular aesthetic. That aesthetic stretches to the kind of things that we serve in the Buddhist center as well. I went to the Buddhist center the other day, and I had a cup of tea. In a British Buddhist center, it's mostly characterized by 1,000 different types of tea bag, as you'd probably expect from a British place. But they're particular types of tea bags. They're not the sort of standard builder's tea that I would drink normally. I picked up a box of tea bags that cost £5 a box, a yogi tea made from chocolate. It was amazing. It was really delicious. I'm not going to lie, really enjoyed it. I thought, what message are we sending out here? We are sending out a pared back middle class aesthetic that looks possibly like most of our homes look like, with tea bags that cost, you know, more than people in the area of the Buddhist center that I go to would have for a meal. And I'm thinking, you know, what kind of messages are we sending out? And this is the conscious, unconscious, I don't know, we're reflecting ourselves in what we're sending out. I don't know. And I find the resistance of the conversation in most of the UK, I'm not saying all, I'm saying in most of the UK context, to be really distressing. I find that the US seems to be further in advance of our kinds of the kind of conversations that we need to have in our sanghas. Yeah, that's me. Out.
Okay, yeah, we'll come back to that. And please,
yeah, well,
further ahead. Let's
yeah, well, Yeah, I think we are a little further ahead in US, but of course there's so much work to be done here. So first of all, I wanted to say for the second question, just to clarify, was that from a person of color who was saying that they were kept up at night worried about racism in their Sangha?
No, it wasn't. No, they said
I unfortunately don't have the racial self-identity.
Okay, well, I just want to say, for anyone who is just kept up at night, which to me is, you know, a state of disturbance because of racism in their Sangha, that immediately tells us why we need to talk about race in the Sangha. The space of sanctuary, we go to our community for refuge. The fact that refuge is a source of pain and not a source of support and holding because of racism tells us why we need to talk about race, right? In a way, that's all that we need to say. The Sanghas are places of harm, and I know that's hard for many of us, but they're places of harm for women, for people of color, for transgender and LGBTQI folk. So as a Buddhist, just speaking as a fellow Buddhist, if one of my Buddhist siblings is hurting, like, I want to know about it. I want to know what are the causes and conditions, what's causing that harm, and how can we uncause it? How can we become free of it together as a community? In terms of the first question, I want to say, first of all, it's a very odd question historically, because if you look at Buddhism, Buddhism's always had lots of things to say about gender. The monastic Sangha is segregated between cisgender men and cisgender women. So why would that be? If gender wasn't an issue in Buddhism, why would the monastic Sangha be segregated? Why are there so many suttas and sutras that discuss gender? So gender, caste, other forms of social identity have always been very much a subject of debate and reflection within the tradition. So it's not as if we're suddenly starting to talk about something that Buddhism has never talked about. We're continuing the conversation in a way that's relevant to our specific cultural context. So whoever, may ask that question, my first suggestion to you is to read some Buddhist history, and that might give you a sense of how these conversations have continued, are continuing. And then also, just ask yourself a question of, in your Sangha, what is the racial makeup? What is the gender makeup in terms of authority? How many female teachers are there? And that should give you a clue of why we need to talk about race and gender. If you're just practicing in a majority white Sangha, which is what I did, myself when I was practicing in Europe and the US, and it's all white, like ask what's going on? Like, why is it all white? Just try and start with that curiosity. Who is in my Sangha? Who isn't, and then who is not in my Sangha, and then why? Like just start it as an investigation and try and put the reactivity aside if you can. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think this is a great conversation. If I may just interject myself here as a BIPOC BAM global majority person, when I'm sitting in Dharma sharing, let's talk about personal experience. When I'm sitting in Dharma sharing, and not necessarily with my local Sangha, because with my local Sangha in Nashville, Tennessee, we've actually even held book study around My Grandmother's Hands with Resma Menachem. We've began to talk about white body supremacy, and my siblings have been open to that and want to have that conversation. But if I'm just kind of in, wherever the space is where I'm in Dharma sharing, and I've heard this from other persons like me, where I begin to share my experience, right? We're supposed to share from our experience. And so one of the things I find is that sometimes when I'm sharing from my experience, I'm talking about race. I'm talking about what it means to live in a racially unjust world. I'm talking about what it means to be a Black woman. I'm talking about using a courageous voice, right? A brave voice that can be construed as angry because I dare to speak, right? And we know that the Buddha says, you know, live in your experience, talk about your experience. My teacher talks about that. And that you take nothing for granted and you take nothing with blindfolds on, right? And yet that can be marginalized, eyes can turn, people can get really uncomfortable when I'm talking from my experience. But when someone is white embodied and they're talking from their experience, then everything is neutral and calm and cool. I also want to see if Rahina or Ava want to jump into this conversation here and share like how these questions have resonated with them, but also just how it shows up and why white awarenesses work from your perspective as a BIPOC, BAM, or global majority person.
So this is Rahina. Ava, would you like to go first?
No, you go ahead. Go ahead, Rahina. I'll follow.
So I think often when we arrive in spaces of Buddhism, we act already, or the Sanghas act as if we're already living in an ultimate dimension. That when we leave our shoes outside the door and enter on the mat, somehow we've left all the social identity, the characterization, the political issues, everything else that construe and identify and categorize us as individuals outside the door. And somehow, through magic, we've all arrived in this space where that identity does not matter, it's immaterial. The second part of it is, and you know, is the element of actually the Buddha's work. The work of Buddhism is around the construction of our ethical identity. Vinaya is one of the whole book of the Buddha's teachings of the Buddhas around the ethics. And part of this is really around looking at our social constructs, our identity, our mental factors that have caused us to react and deal with the world in a particular way. And this, when we start to explore who we really are, we recognize that those views that you have are not your views. They are socially determined. So it's impossible for you to be sitting, any one of us to be sitting in a Sangha without us coming with an identity, with all those shapes, different permutations of that identity, the intersectionality of it into the space that we come. That's part of the practice, is the liberation of that. And so for me, I think, you know, just touching on what Caroline said and Anne, there's also in my experience in sitting in sanghas where people are maybe aware and want to have the conversation, but actually there's also the case of, in the UK, this is the heart of colonization. The pain from this country embedded in the feudal system has been perpetuated all around the world. The class issue in this country and that pain that has been created from that, the justice system in this country is built on the rich and the poor, is class-based. And so, you know, it's impossible not to address all of those aspects when we're also dealing with race. So this is really, you know, for here, it's a historical legacy that has spread, colonialization has spread all around the world. And it's really important that we understand that history of how that influences our minds, how that surfaces. Just as and I think when I'm sitting in Dharma sharing groups, often you hear things like, I don't see color. Well, actually, do you see the roses are red and, you know, the earth is brown? Or it is the experience that comes up, which is, and I understand it's empathetic, but also, I've experienced suffering this way as well. You know, I have my history, my legacy of history has also got the suffering. So I think, you know, it's there, and it's like you, but I think it's also having the ability. We talked a little bit about discomfort. Discomfort is important, because
we're gonna bring Ava in. Rahina.
Yes, the discomfort is important. And so maybe Ava will continue with the discomfort bit.
Yes, discomfort. Yes, absolutely.
Discomfort.
Ava, and then we're going to go to a break after Ava. But Ava,
Sure.
please.
Well, thanks, Rahina. That was great. While you were reading the first question, something occurred to me, which is that it's a sense that often white communities feel so terribly judged because of racism. And instead of seeing racism as a suffering, they see it as a wrongness, right? There's almost a resentment that people of color don't have to do this. Why do I have to do this? You know, it's not fair. This sense that they're being, you know, wronged now. Without realizing again that, you know, it's all suffering. People BIPOC have a different kind of suffering. We've been suffering in a completely different way, but they're also suffering. And that if they could maybe see that instead of feeling offended and feeling wronged, because this is the work we have to do right now. We all have to work on our suffering, and we all have to work on our discriminative thoughts and all the things that we all carry. That might be helpful, because nobody gets a pass.
Absolutely.
We all sit on that mat.
Absolutely.
We all sit on our seats and look deeply, and we have different things to look at, but we're all working. So I think I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. Thank you all. You know, this idea around discriminative thought, just everything that you all have raised. I mean, one of the 4 immeasurables is equanimity, and that is to deal with and enter into a space of non-discrimination, right? And the other thing I just want to say before I ask Rahina to invite a sound of the bell so that we could have a break for us to kind of ponder as we go to our break, and then we'll come back and have some more conversation, is that there is something to be said about both understanding how people have been wronged and oppressed, and also how we all experience suffering. And in doing that, we cannot lose the issue of power. Power actually is in play. It's in play in the world, it's in play in our Sanghas. It's everywhere. And so this is why, one reason why I think, you know, being careful about convert Sangha, heritage Sangha is really important. But we can't lose the language of convert Sangha to the degree that we can attach it to and do some deep investigative work about what it means to be Western and white in that kind of space, and lay claim to a tradition that then excludes, in some ways, the kinds of conversations that you all have talked about have been going on for centuries in different kinds of ways, if not more recently now. So let's sit with all of that. We'll come back and we'll talk about what do white Buddhists need to do to dismantle their inherent white supremacy, unconscious or conscious, and dive deeper into this conversation. Thank you so much, Rahina. If you could offer us the sound of the bell. Rhonda behind you. Turn it over to Kamlo.
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you everybody for this really wonderful conversation. Throwing everything into the mix, it's really, really fun. Thank you so much. So now we're going to go to a little musical break with singer and songwriter Joe Holtaway. Joe's from Cornwall, and in addition to writing and performing his own music, Cornwall in the UK, that is, and in addition to writing and performing his own music, manages the Peace Sounds label, a label dedicated to singing and speaking for and about peace and social justice. So, Rahina, if you would invite the bell and, oh, sorry, well, yes, please do invite the bell, and then we'll have Joe.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here, Rahina. And I was invited to play a song of mine tonight that was on this theme. And decided to play you a recording and talk about it and then play it for you with the lyrics on the screen. And so this was inspired by, after reading Layla F. Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. There's a couple of quotes I'd like to read from that. I can tell you a bit more about it then. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm also a member and practicing in Thich Nhat Hanh's International Sangha. And yeah, these two quotes, I had these written actually in my diary while kind of reading that book, which is really confronting. And if you haven't read the Saad's book, she really kind of keeps you there, and like she won't let you, someone said before, you don't get a pass, and that's very much her style. It was a challenge. The book was like written as a challenge on Instagram, and each chapter is based on one of those challenges, and it was to get you to look at your ancestry. And I think for me it was very much about how all the stuff that's kind of happened, we talked about colonialism, and all the kind of power and privileges accumulated that is in the past, and then through Buddhist practice we know that the past isn't really in the past. It's very much a kind of interrelated part of the present. So I wrote these two things in my journal. These are quotes from the book. White supremacy is a system that you've been born into, whether or not you have known it. It is a system that has granted you unearned privileges, protection, and power. And the second one is, you can't dismantle what you can't see. You cannot challenge what you do not understand. So as a songwriter, I suppose it's been like I guess, is obsession the right word? I don't know. I've been very drawn to, since I wrote my first song when I was about 10 or 11, my dad's a folk singer and a songwriter, was to use it as a way of kind of exploring myself, I guess, and the things that were kind of coming into my life and putting them into music. And this was one song that's come out of this opening journey into understanding who I am and what my inheritance is, I suppose. So this is a song called This Skin, and it's myself on guitar and a dear friend of mine called Naomi Haig playing the cello. I'm just going to share my screen with you. I get some thumbs up. You can see the green screen with the text.
Yeah.
Great. Forgive me for doing this again. I need to make sure I have the sound on. Yeah. Okay.
This skin scared of the edges, born into power and privileges, inherited. Oh, this skin, oh, this skin. This skin scared of the edges, born into power and privileges, inherited. Oh, this skin, oh, this skin. I am a landowner, I was a slave owner, I have steered the ship. Oh, this skin, oh, this skin. cost and counted, watching wealth unmounted. I have taken my split. Oh, this skin, oh, this skin. This skin scared of the edges, born into power and privileges, inherited. Oh, this skin, oh, this skin. Separated, segregated, profited from it. Oh, this skin, oh, this skin. Punishments permitted, I have been acquitted, I still hear the wind. Oh, this skin, oh, this skin. This skin scared of the edges, born into power and privileges, inherited. Oh, this skin, 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 oh, this skin. I will learn to look within, in and out, again and again and again. Oh, this skin, I will learn to look within, in and out, again and again and again. Oh, this skin, I will learn to look within, in and out, again and again and again.
Hey, thanks a lot for listening. I got another quote I'd like to read you just before we let you go to your break, I think. And this is a quote by my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, who, talks a lot about interbeing, and I really like the way that he jumped into that in such deep ways, very compassionately holding your hand and also showing you the truth. We spoke there about listening to the Sangha, and if the Sangha is suffering, then we're suffering. It's our word, isn't it? I feel like being a part of everyone, and everyone being a part of us is what Sangha and family is. And Thich Nhat Hanh says in the book Teachings on Love, he says, continue practicing until you see yourself in the cruelest person on earth, in the starving child, in the political prisoner. Practice until you recognize yourself in everyone, in the supermarket, on the street corner, in a concentration camp, on a leaf, in a dewdrop. Meditate till you see yourself in a speck of dust in a distant galaxy. See and listen with the whole of your being. If you're fully present, the rain of Dharma will water the deepest seeds in your consciousness. And tomorrow, while you are washing the dishes or looking at the beautiful sky, that seed will spring forth, and love and understanding will appear as a beautiful flower. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Joe. Really appreciate that. And now I think we're going to keep it flowing. If Rhonda, I can't see Rhonda. Where? We're going to keep it flowing, Rhonda. Keep the conversation going.
Okay.
So over to you.
Yes, let us flow. Thank you so much, Joe. And you can't dismantle what you can't see, is one of the things that I wrote down from what you said and what you read. And, this question of born into privilege and interbeing, what our teacher talks about, all nice segues into continuing this conversation with Anne and Caroline. And the point that Caroline raised too about, I don't want to be in a Sangha that doesn't want to have these conversations. And so, I might just leave, or I leave and find another Sangha. And I want us to talk about that too. The privilege of being able to leave and find another Sangha, right? And so when do you leave and when do you stay and do the work, right? And when is enough enough? Like, when does self-care come in that as well? So let me put the next question on the floor for us in our Zoom room. What do white Buddhists need to know and do to dismantle the inherent white supremacy culture in Western convert, that's that word again, Western convert Buddhist spaces? So what should these spaces look like? What should manifest in the spaces where we're doing the work, where we're doing white awareness work? And if you want to talk a little bit more about what white awareness work is, how that manifests, that'd be great as well. So Anne or Caroline?
I'll start if you want, Caroline. It kind of makes sense with my research. I'm looking at my notes and putting my academic hat on here. But thank you, Joe, for that beautiful song. It really touched me. So I think, as Joe said, the first thing is really to recognize whiteness and racism. And, it is just really hard for white people to see whiteness. And so I think that, first of all, it's important to really listen to your Dharma siblings of color and listen to their experience in the Sangha, and then listen to Black voices and brown voices in society. I'm a big footy fan. I'm actually missing the Liverpool quarter-final right now. But football has, started the campaign to stamp out racism. And it's kind of amazing to me that football is more receptive to these conversations than many Buddhists. Like, I really want to say that. I think it's something that we need to really think about. Buddhists are like loving, compassionate, ending suffering. So what's happening there? There's something's gone awry. So listening to, people of color, to their experience, I think it's also important to think about the difference between individual acts of racism and structures of racism. I think a lot of, white Buddhists think, I'm not racist. I don't have any, stereotypes or negative associations with Black and brown people. That might be true, although you may find as you dig deeper that you actually do have some stereotypes. That's what I found personally doing this work. But we have to think about racism as structures, what Joe said, as kind of these structures that orient us. And I think if you white working class, you can think about analogous systems of class as a way in, So first of all, I think, listening, thinking about the difference between individual and collective forms or structural forms of racism can be really helpful. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. It's awful. We're all feeling so much for the refugees, but it's really clear the different kind of responses that have happened with white refugees compared to brown and Black refugees, and also with Black and brown Ukrainians. Those stories are like widely available right now. It's a moment to wake up. Oh, this is it. This is what people mean when they're talking about structural racism. Even in these moments of intense suffering, we're still in suffering and heart opening, we're still seeing the same systems of racism at work. Then I would say, I'm a big fan of white awareness groups. White awareness groups are practices. It's a training program, but it's a practice modality, which, I think gives a space for white people to really investigate their own conditioning of what does it mean to be white? I mean, most of us have probably never even thought, let alone asked that question. What does it mean to be white? And then also, how does white supremacy cause suffering for people of color primarily, but also for ourselves? Like white supremacy, like it takes a chunk out of all of us. It, as I think Ava mentioned, it is both a form of aggression towards others, towards people of color, but it's also a form of aggression against ourselves. And I think there's like behind all the anger and the reactivity and the defensiveness, I think you get there and there's like a lot of pain. Like it's a separation, you know, it's a deep separation. And then also then the Buddhist part, right? How can we be free of this particular form of suffering? So I think that can happen safely in the white awareness groups. And, you know, it gives white people a space where they can work their process without injuring, you know, people of color, siblings, Buddhist siblings in the same space. So I just think like a white awareness is a safe space for me as a white person to work through my conditioning without hurting people of color. And then I think more broadly, how can white Buddhists support Buddhists of color? Well, the first thing to remember is white awareness is just a lane on a big track. It's a strand that comes out of this wider movement for racial justice. We have to be careful not to like make it the center, right? It's one of many tracks in this big path to racial justice. So institutionally, some things that white Buddhists can do, I'm going to read them out because I think they're really helpful. This is from a study from Craig Haas, Stephanie Budge, and James Meadows. It's available online. They did a deep social scientific study of how the experiences of people of color in a white majority Sangha, and they ended up with the following conclusions. So one is that we recommend that white leaders of meditation communities undergo racial awareness training, especially concerning the deleterious, I think that means harmful, impacts of microaggressions and unconscious acts of white supremacy. So that's the way white Buddhists are harming people of color without realizing it. That shouldn't come as a surprise to us. We're Buddhists. We know as Buddhists that we're driven by samkaras, unconscious forces that we're not aware of. So it's completely congruent with our practice, right? Two, we recommend that primarily white meditation communities open new locations or relocate to multi-ethnic and working class neighborhoods. That'll be a good one for you to talk about, Caroline, with the class link. A lot of meditation centers in the US are inaccessible to lower income communities who are a large proportion of which are people of color. I didn't learn to drive myself until I was 38. I had to in the States. The public transport's not as good, but that really makes places inaccessible. It also makes places very unwelcoming for people of color, where they show up and they're the only person of color in the neighborhood and then in the Buddhist center, and often face microaggressions, asking why are they there. One Buddhist color of teacher was asked if she was a cleaner, was a cleaning staff, and she was a teacher of color in the retreat. A third is we recommend that primarily white meditations communities institute scholarships for people of color, provide actual economic and material support to nurture the presence of people of color, and that also that white groups support the formation of POC, people of color. I think we use BAM, you use BAM in the UK, affinity spaces. This has been, just like the first question that we got of like, how is this to do with Buddhism, which had a fair amount of aggression? There's been a lot of hostility and misunderstanding of POC affinity spaces. but they're really essential spaces for Buddhists of color. So get behind them, and let's kind of let's do our work to make our Sanghas refuges for all. Sorry, I'll stop now.
Caroline, thank you.
Oh,
Caroline,
thank
you
you.
want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, it took me too long to unmute myself there. So sticky computer. Yeah, thanks, Anne. That was so useful, and thank you so much for the beautiful song as well. It was absolutely wonderful to listen to. I enjoyed that immensely and found it really, really moving. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Anne said, and also some of the things that mentioned about. I guess the theme of what I want to say right now is more to do with that point that Anne just made from the list about moving to working class neighbourhoods, because I'm a football fan as well as Anne. Anne supports Liverpool. Obviously most people would have heard of Liverpool. The football team I support, Luton, is a provincial small football team that's very different to Liverpool. And so I was minded when you talked about, when you said, Anne, about Liverpool and the stamping out racism in football, and how in the Premiership, how we've got this onto football, the Premiership, that you might certainly see the impacts of that on the terraces. When you go to Luton, and when I watch Luton away, you don't see the impact of that. And even though it's there in a banner that says stamp racism out of football, it's not really present. Racism still occurs very regularly on the terraces alongside homophobia. And I was minded then really of some of the differences then between big urban, maybe Buddhist centres that are high profile, and smaller centres that might be in the provinces, that might be tucked away, that might have and I'm kind of thinking of the differences there. And one of the things that you were saying was, from the list, is move to a working class neighbourhood, a POC neighbourhood, and thankfully that list contained a number of other things to do as well. Because in the Buddhist centre I'm spending quite a lot of time in at the moment, they moved from a very fancy place, a city centre place that was very fancy, to a really economically and socially deprived place about 10 minutes away from where I live. And actually, unless you are willing to do the work, just moving isn't sufficient. Unless you are willing to do the work, the likes of which was outlined in some of Anne's lists, then actually that concretizes the problem, because it makes your Sangha like this kind of island that is just resistant to change. And it's really, really tricky, I think, just to do that. There's so much more complicated work that needs to go on. And just picking up on Rhonda's point about when you have the privilege to leave, or when you have to take self-care, it's true. I've left places, I've left many places and people, and that is imbued with great privilege and ability to walk away. In the situation I'm in at the moment, I can completely appreciate that. If I wish, I have children, one of whom has a disability. So if I wish to actually practice with some other Buddhists, I have one centre that I can go to, that I can get to. And so I haven't, I can't walk away from that. But then there is a kind of issue of self-care. How many times can you keep being the one who is raising certain tracks of conversation, and it is really tricky. I think I have no answer to that whatsoever, no answer at all. Only simply it is wanting to, and I think Kamlo made it really clear in the beginning, and it's almost like I want to bring that back into some of the spaces that I'm part of, because Kamlo said, you have to, it's sitting with this discomfort. It's allowing a brave space, because it's really tricky to kind of to be the one who's constantly having this conversation. It's tricky for anybody who's doing that, isn't it? I'm not saying I'm doing it all the time, most certainly not. But for people who are, it's really discomforting, it's really tricky, it's really isolating, really alienating. And kind of having that understanding of what is a brave space and what that might do seems more kind of collaborative and wholesome to me. I really like that. I've taken that on board a great deal.
Thank you. Anne, you wanna jump back in?
Okay, to just pick up on that, I think it's a really essential point that Caroline emphasized. Would it be okay to talk about East Bay Meditation Society? Because I think the origin of that community kind of bridge, it's an intervention in not just taking your white middle class space and plonking it down in an urban space, because it won't work for the community. It won't work for the community. It won't do anything really for the community that you're plonking down in. Is it okay if I just speak about East Bay?
Yeah, in fact, I think you already started speaking about East Bay.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to tell you what it's super important. It is such an important point. So for those who don't know, the East Bay Meditation Center is a very it's a very innovative social justice Buddhist community, and it started in 2008 in the East Bay, in Oakland in the East Bay. And the community basically was developed by mostly nearly all Buddhists of color who had been practicing in the larger Insight community. And they were at Spirit Rock, which is a meditation center also in the Bay Area of California, but it's in Marin County, which is a very, wealthy, predominantly white suburb that's really impossible to get to. Like, you have to take like 3 buses to get there. I know, because I've done it a lot. And so they really wanted to offer a center. They wanted to create a multiracial and working class center. But so they decided they wanted to start the center in Oakland, which is very accessible by public transport. It's a multiracial, working class, traditionally neighborhood. But they knew if they just took the Insight model, the way that the Insight community had always done it, and put that down in Oakland, it wouldn't work. So they actually went into the community. They asked the community, what would you want from a center? So they started in relationship with this multiracial working class community. It was from the very start responding to the specific needs rather than top down. And then
let me jump in. Absolutely. I mean, this is a great example of the way in which people of color, BIPOC, BAM, global majority people have found themselves in a larger Mahasangha space, and it's not catering to their needs. They can't access it, and so they create accessibility. So I think this is, East Bay Meditation Center is a center that people can look up. This is really important. And it ties back to, and I want to bring in Ava and Rahina here in a moment, it ties back to the question of what does white awareness look like for white people, white embodied people, right? And part of it is being able to understand why these centers are necessary and that they are actually happening, even supporting them. But the other side of it is, what work do white people need to do on themselves, right? What I found in my conversations with other white practitioners, is that it's so much easier for them to support, quotation, air quotation marks here, support BIPOC, BAM, global majority people, if they're going to do that, than to actually work on themselves, right? And so it's like, I'll go organize in the Black and brown community, but I won't go necessarily organize in the white communities where the problems of supremacy, individual and collective, are being manifested and actually perpetuated. So and I found this also with training. So for instance, I've, doing a training on race. And what I found is that Black people, brown people, BIPOC, BAM, global majority people pour their hearts out. They share their stories, they share their experiences. But with white embodied people, what I find is they say, oh, I'm so taken by your story and your experiences, but they don't do the internal work, right? So the question I want to put on the floor here is, in our Zoom room, is how can we have white awareness spaces, right? Where we're actually focused on this and not have the shadow aspects of that, which is the recentering of white people who then, maybe act in a kind of paternalistic kind of framework, for BIPOC, BAM, global majority people, or reproduce white supremacy by not doing their own kind of internal work, right? So how can we build these kinds of spaces without reinforcing white privilege, without reinforcing white supremacy and white centeredness, and seeing the problem as outside of themselves? So the shadow aspects. Let me bring Ava in, if you could, and then Rahina offer some brief words here, and then we'll open it back up to the entire panel.
Thanks, Rhonda. It's this is so deep because I've been living in Africa for 21 years, and I have an all-Black Sangha that I attend, and I'm Mexican American, I'm Latinx, and I have a Vietnamese community. Thich Nhat Hanh has always been my teacher, and I can just tell you that the reason Thich Nhat Hanh became my teacher was because the very first time that I went to a retreat, Larry Ward was my Sangha group discussion leader, and there was a place, it was the first time that we had a BIPOC retreat. It was 23 years ago or something. And I just thought, oh my gosh, my goodness. I mean, I can't even express to you the feeling of being home and feeling safe. And someone mentioned before, we can't heal where we're not safe. Whether you're white or Black or purple, it doesn't matter. But you have to also ask yourself, what makes you feel safe? Why do I feel safe here and not somewhere else? Right? What is that about? Right? And if nothing else, we pray that our practice, and it's fundamental that you must practice regularly. Your practice will help you to look at those questions and uncover what it is, the mystery of that. Again, and if these conversations make you feel uncomfortable, to say, well, why? What is it? Why? And keep with that. So again, I'm always, whatever, I've been living, I come back and forth from the States. And I've gotten much more discrimination in Africa for being American. And even though I'm Latinx, I'm American. And so we tend to be pushy and tend to be direct and tend to be very different sometimes than what is expected in African community. And I've had to learn what it meant to be American. I didn't know that. So I can relate to that in whiteness. And sometimes people thought I was white. I'm not white, no, but I was very much American in the way I approached the work and the way I was approaching whatever was happening. And I think that I thought I knew what democracy was before I came to Africa. As an American, I thought I understood that, but I didn't. And it was only until I came to Botswana that I really finally understood what it meant to allow everyone to have a voice. Botswana is just rooted deeply in democracy, the way the government is structured and community and what is valued here. And, I am so grateful that people put up with me for a long time until I understood, right, what respect really meant. I didn't learn that in America. I learned it in Africa. And so I hope those words help you.
All words into the circle help. And let's thank you, Ava. Let's Rahina, let's bring you in here. And you're muted. You're muted, dear.
Am I okay now?
Okay, you're better now. And yet to talk about these shadow aspects would be really good.
Yes, I'm going to touch a little bit on what, as a segue from what Anne said, which is the entry point, the white awareness training and this, and the white affinity Sanghas that have emerged are an entry point. And part of it is getting aware of where your orientation is, but we also need to locate this, and there's a sensitivity here around being aware of our intentions of it. Given that our white culture, white organization, white led, have access to resources, have access to actually grow much faster. There's a shadow aspect of where the white affinity sanghas can become centered on whiteness, and in that centering they can become another privileged group which then act as if they are the I'm just saying it's a possibility where they become the Dharma police of social justice, where they can then define who, that awareness bit. So I think if I have to look at practical examples of where some of the shadowous aspects of the white affinity group I've experienced is for most of the time where Buddhists have called me non-white, have come from those who actually came and have done the white awareness sanghas, have done the training on white awareness. So we need to also look when we do this is the awareness is one thing, but the second is how do we act? How do we act, and how do we act not just when we march in solidarity with BIPOC folk, but how do we act in our everyday life? How do we act when we see that something is mislabeled? How do we act when we actually see what is happening around us to BIPOC folk? So I'll give you an example, one shadow aspect that emerged for me. There was a Buddhist march that went and happened around social justice. It was really interesting. The debrief after that actually reorganized a space, a communal space, a public space. When I suggested that we move everything back together, the comment that came up was, well, they're cleaners to do that. So who are the cleaners? So you're standing and marching for social justice as a BIPOC, in solidarity with BIPOC, BAME global majority. But the reality of it is your action right there demonstrated this shadow aspect. So it's also looking at, and where I'm going with this is, what is our intention? When we're doing this white awareness, what is our intent? And so when we're acting, what is our intent? Because we know that we all center in terms of our society. We all work on a good person narrative. We all want to be good people. And as soon as there's discomfort, when that narrative doesn't perpetuate, where we can't hold on to that narrative, we either react by throwing it away, by reacting in some way. But actually that is the opportunity to actually reflect on my intention. I have caused harm. What is the learning from that? What were the causes and conditions that led to that? And how can I learn from that discomfort? Because often we all, I think we want to be good. We want to actually, support people. And so that intention, we center again around whiteness. Mm-hmm. One example I also want to raise is how this.
I'll jump in after you finish.
Yeah. Okay. Which is, in this is sometimes in the centering that I've done the work, I've done the white awareness work, we then can choose to act. And when we choose to act, often the action is on behalf of, and in recognition that you're actually speaking on behalf of a BIPOC person. So we leap into action to support a BIPOC group, a BIPOC community, without checking whether that is exactly what they want. And that, Anne, you mentioned EMBC. EMBC is built on consultation, and consultation is, I come from Africa, is the bedrock of how a community builds, how conflict is resolved, and how things are defined, which is every voice is important. Pace is not important. It's including every voice that's important. So that's the second part of that centeredness. So making the decisions as if, you know, oh yes, BIPOC people need this space, let me go ahead and do that.
Right. Well, and it's like it's also kind of an and let's bring Anne and Caroline back.
Yeah.
And we have, you know, the time
Wait a
just
minute.
goes so quickly, y'all. We have 10
Rhonda, if you
minutes
don't mind, I just want to give you one example.
Okay, but let me
bring this
actually, Rahina, could you hold your example
Okay,
just real quick? Because, you know, what I think is really important that I want to highlight from what you said, and then, you know, maybe people will give us grace so that we can go around. What I want to highlight is, again, back to this point of speaking on behalf. Not only the intention of doing the work, and also the importance of being allies and in solidarity with people of color, but the idea of once you have a training, once you have this moment, then all of a sudden you become the expert. It's that shadow aspect of recentering oneself, the privilege and the power to say, oh, I've got some training now, it's on my CV, it's on my Dharma CV, it's on my Dharma resume. And so now I can step out and speak on behalf of Black people, on behalf of brown people, global majority people. The question is, how am I continuously doing that internal work? And how can this be a part of the work without being recentered as it's about white people? You know, and we reestablish white Sanghas as white for white people, because white Sanghas are already white Sanghas, right? Even if I'm in it, I'm in a majority white Sangha. I'm the person of color who shows up, the BIPOC person who shows up, right? And so even my being able to jump from Sangha to Sangha, I'm still ending up in majority white Sanghas, even if I take my own self-care into consideration and jump. You know, there are more BIPOC Sanghas, but I think this is really important about who's staying, who's doing the work, where are you doing the work, and how are you making sure that you're not reinscribing privilege and power in the work that you do. And this happens in our Sangha spaces. So I want us to kind of noodle on that and to think about how BIPOC people can be allies for white awareness people doing the work in terms of their honest conversation and speaking up, and how white people, white embodied people see this white awareness of work unfolding in concrete ways without reinscribing power dynamics. While you noodle on that, because I think this might be our last round, I do want to bring in just a couple comments that have come in through the chat. And they are more comments than they are questions. So, you know, it's a good thing. Thank you all so much for participating and sending in your comments and your questions. Here's a question, it's a thought experiment. What if a sign is put up at Buddhist centers? The sign says, white people are no longer welcome in Buddhist venues due to Buddhism having been started by global majority people, end quote. If this became a rule, I wonder if white Buddhists would then be more willing to embrace the essential need for white awareness. So this is kind of thought experiment about, like, what if the roles were flipped? What if the script was flipped, right? So it's, it's, we can just noodle on that. You know, we can think about how the question itself is even asked there, right? Because of the often open-armedness of BIPOC, BAM, and global majority Sanghas for white embodied people. So the idea of flipping the script in and of itself can, either be activating or you go, but just think about it as a thought experiment. The other comment that came in, really kind of maybe advice, or just, again, keep in mind that the audience you are trying to reach could be classified as introverts. So this is, about like how we move in our own bodies, across racial lines, across gender lines, across class lines. The relationship will need to grow organically. Do not come on too strong. We can question like what too strong means and who is that too strong being pointed at. Too strong when approaching new or established BIPOC members. I would start by setting up a kiosk of community events in the neighborhood that you are trying to establish the center in. The question about, establishing the center, again, like what's the privilege and power there, is something we can noodle on. Offer a meditation tent or kiosk at the local parks or near businesses that are frequented by your audience. So the question is like, how can we concretely begin to build bridges and take into consideration how people are entering into space in different bodies in their earth clothes. So I just wanted to put those in to the mix. Here's a response from a BIPOC person to the comment that I just read out. It's happening quick, y'all. Suggestion in the chat is deeply presumptuous. White supremacist, pompous and condescending. I'm profoundly offended as a POC. What was shared was egregious and disrespectful. I'd like this to be addressed. So here we have it right now, right? I mean, the way I said, let's noodle, and then the way I started interjecting, well, what about this? What about that? I mean, this might not happen with BIPOC community, BAM, or global majority, right? And so we have now someone who's BIPOC who's chiming in real time on this. So we have a lot on the floor. We have 5 minutes left. I don't know if we have any grace for 5 minutes to close out, but I'm going to silence myself. And I'm just glad I was able to get different people's voices into this conversation here. So maybe we have, it sounds like some pressing need to address that last response. And I think that opens up the whole conversation in terms of the questions that are left on the table anyway. Rhonda, bowing out.
So Rahina stepping in, I think, often when we're making suggestions on how to grow communities, we need to check what is our intention in doing this. Is it because we, as a predominantly white-led Sangha, want to grow the membership to reflect diversity and inclusion without transforming the spaces that we have? And we do this by either offering events that are, that attract BIPOC, BAME, global majority folk, without actually addressing the energy that has gone into creating our space. And that is where I would say majority of the UK Sanghas sit. We have white Sanghas who want to, may have some awareness, but want to attract BIPOC folk. But there is very little that I see happening in building what that transformation might look like. For example, building the BIPOC teachers in the UK. What we do is in the UK, there's often a glance to turn to the US, where we have established BIPOC teachers to bring them to the UK so that we can attract more BIPOC spaces. And in doing that, attendees to our centers. In doing that, what we've done is actually closed down, erased the voices of BIPOC, BAME, global majority voices right here in this country. So in terms of, offering suggestions of what we need to do, this is so typical in a way of, wanting to be helpful, but at the same time acknowledging, rather than understanding what the needs of the community are. And this is really, really important, because when we're going into spaces, the listening, our practice is about listening. Our practice is about understanding. It's about seeing the causes and conditions that have resulted into this, and in reacting with deep compassion. The civil justice movement was built with love, not with anger, not with retribution, with love, with compassion. And so if we retaliate in the same ways of how things, in doing what was being done to us as BIPOC folk, then we continuing this energy of, the Dalai Lama said this very eloquently. If we continue going for what is the saying, an eye for an eye. If we react with an eye for an eye, then we end up with 7 billion people being blind.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's really important for us as BIPOC as well, for me to understand where my blind spots are, because I actually have grown up in a white supremacist culture. I cannot have grown up in this culture without imbibing some of the water. So I too need to see in my energy of trying to build these spaces that my intention, I hope that my intention is never retribution. It is around building spaces, new spaces, and often it can't be done in an existing space. You know, I mean, just in this example, the example I wanted to give was we just don't have to go very far from the Buddhist spaces to see the number of Buddhists that have had metta circles for Ukraine in, you know, and totally understand the deep suffering, feel that deeply. Metta circles, you know, not just refugees, but metta circles, special sessions around this. I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed that there's so many of this that has emerged in the UK, sitting circles to send metta to the Ukraine. But in that, that's where the shadow aspect also emerges. What about Syria? What about Palestine? What about all of these other spaces that have been having wars for the last time? So this is our check. Our check is to, you know, in my thinking, what is it that I'm actually, what is my intention? Can I see those blind spots? And as a BIPOC, that's what we offer, a sense check, not to do the work for you, but actually a sense check. But the sense check has to be done with in terms of intentionality of what we want to do together, not as a request for me. Yeah, so I think that's what I want to do. I've taken a lot of time, so I want to.
No, it's, I mean, I wish we had more time, but, you know, I also want to, I'm aware of the time that everyone is giving to us now, and if people have to leave. So let's just go around. I'm gonna bring Anne in for some final words, and I'll bounce to Ava.
Sorry to interrupt. I know that Caroline needs to head off very quickly. So
okay, well, let me, Anne, Caroline, let me bring Caroline in, and then I'll bounce to Ava, and then Anne, and then we'll have a closure. Caroline, please.
Thank you. I actually don't think I have anything more to say in a short period of time. I'm just really grateful for the conversation. I echo a lot of what Rahina's been saying as well. It's certainly true in my own experience as well. And I really hope that we can continue on this really, really important conversation, and we can take these back to our places. And just to continue, because it can't be covered in an hour and a half or an hour. It's a tiny drop, and it can't, like, it's the same with the training, right? You can't just say you have, in the UK we call it equality and diversity training. You can't just say you've had your hour of equality and diversity training and then suddenly you're okay.
You're credentialed, you got it.
Yeah, you've done that equality and diversity training for that year or whatever, and that's okay. You know, this is ongoing, constant. And it's like it is all these intersections of identity, race, class, gender, disability, you know, age is a big thing for us to think about in as well. You know, all these things that intersect and work together, and it's a long-term, everlasting conversation. I think I'm just really grateful to be a tiny part of it, so thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Bounce it to Ava.
Thank you. I want to pick up on something Rahina said, which was centering on love. We have to continuously center our practice on that. And, you know, the wonderful, beautiful bell hooks, you know, has helped us so much to understand what is dominance, what is that internally, externally, and to position ourselves honestly about where we stand in that continuum, and to really be able to identify dominance internally as violence towards self and violence towards another. And I'll leave it at that, but I think that's where we all can agree and move forward. Thank you. And thank you for including me. It's been a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Ava. It's been wonderful having you in the conversation. And let's bounce to you.
Yeah, well, I just want to echo, I mean, how do you follow bell hooks? I've already sat for our time. I guess I just want to say to the white people on the call that it's really painful and challenging to do this work, but there's also incredible joy and love in it. And that coming into actual real relationship with people of color is like worth every bit of pain and anguish and guilt and shame. Like ultimately it's about coming into relationship with each other. And so I just want to say there's so much joy in this work as well. And I'm just so, I feel like I made 3 like new mates, you know. It's been great to connect with Ava, Rahina and Rhonda, and you know, it's a practice of friendship and community and love ultimately. So thank you for the space.
Thank you, Anne. And so I just want to offer one more comment that came in as part of this dialogue that we've been having. We had a comment, then we had a response, and now we have a response to the response, and then we can close out. So the response to the response, I am Northern California Pomo. Please forgive me if I mispronounce anything. I am Northern California Pomo and Mishawal Wapo, indigenous citizen, mixed with 2 Asian grandparents. Although I have a white first name, there is no trace of white privilege here. My suggestion came from my own experience. This is in response to the person who made the comment suggesting kiosks. So not the hypothetical noodling, you know, thought experiment, but the one who said, you can't, you know, people are introverted. You can't just kind of, you know, go in and just like force yourself on people. You have to figure out how to engage with community, maybe setting up kiosks and doing this and doing this and that. And so this is the response from the person who actually made that suggestion. So one of the things I like to end with is that there's so much in our Zoom room circle right now. As Caroline said, we can't cover it in an hour and a half or 2 hours, which is how long we've been together. And so there's just lots of work to do. And as Rahina said, all of us have assumptions, perceptions that we need to work on. We come in thinking we know who's saying what and from what kind of viewpoint, but we don't. And so all of us have the room to expand. But key is this white awareness work is important. It cannot be recentered in a white supremacist way. White embodied people have to do their own work. I mean, global majority people can help, you know, and do our own work. And this is our practice. This is it.
I think
Rahina?
love is the way.
Love is the way. This is it. Love is the way. And this is the work. Work must be done. So Rahina offers the sound of the bell. Thank you all for letting me facilitate. Rhonda bowing out.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much, everybody. That was just a really, really exciting, invigorating conversation. And thank you for all your incredible contributions, Anne, Ava, Caroline, and Rhonda, for your masterful steering of this conversation and really, you know, just keeping it flowing so effortlessly. It was just really so inspiring and moving. And I'm really grateful to, and Rahina, of course, for being on this panel as well and sharing your reflections. I really feel honoured to have been able to just sit here and listen and take in all of the wisdom. We're going to close out. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time, you know, for an extensive question and answer portion. But I think you'll agree that you know, the discussion and reflections that have been shared have been well worth it, and it was more than appropriate to let the speakers have their time and share their thoughts with us. Just a very quick note on donations. Just want to thank you so much to all of you who have offered and contributed donations to this event. And if you would like to, or and if you haven't yet contributed, then the links are in the chat. 100% of your contribution helps support and sustain the network of participants and panelists and goes directly to the people who are at the forefront of change making and building collective well-being. So it's really, you know, it's really helpful and going to the people who are contributing to these discussions directly. It doesn't have to be a large donation. It can be whatever you can offer. But it is definitely a way of honoring the insights and the reflections and the wisdom of the people who have contributed to this conversation. I don't want to run on for too long because we're already over time, so I'll just ask Rahina to bring the bell in one more time, and then we'll do a short dedication. Okay, so thank you. And let's take a minute to pause and just think about all of the energy that has been created and nurtured in this space that we've spent and this time that we've spent together. All of the meritorious thoughts, we've put ourselves in a position of wanting to improve and deepen our relationships to each other. And so, in the context specifically of racial justice, let us dedicate all of this energy, everything we've discussed, thought about, reflected upon, to the deepest and most profound realization of the practice of equanimity. So this practice of equanimity just imbibes and permeates and completely fills the space of our being. And to the complete elimination of any ignorance which may cause us to either intentionally or unintentionally inflict harm on others. And to the abundant flourishing of our innate qualities of love, compassion, and wisdom. And may we all awaken to understanding the roots of suffering and inequities and act to address them and apply the antidotes. Thank you so much.